In loving memory of Madge Rosetta, may her memory be a reminder of the history we don't want to repeat. The Swamp in Gallatin Street. Outside of the myths of the Fiala Cassette and the women who came to New Orleans on La Moutine, I haven't found much information about sex work in the first century of the colony. Attempts to regulate sex work on a federal level did not begin until World War I. In the second century of the city, according to Richard Campanella, young men wanted to see the elephant in the biggest city in the South. More adventurous men seeking a New Orleans experience patronized the swamp, the area that petered out into the actual swamp, where industry mingled with society and vice. This area included the Girard Cemetery, opened in 1822 and closed in 1959, the New Basin Canal, which was built in 1832, Charity Hospital, opened in 1835, and the Orleans Parish Prison, opened in 1837. From Herbert Asbury's The French Quarter, an informal history of the New Orleans underworld, we get this vivid account. Quote, "The swamp comprised an area of half a dozen blocks, crowded with saloons, dance halls, gambling dens, bordellos, and so-called hotels, all housed in shacks with low gable roofs built of rough cypress planks or lumber from old flatboats. Most of the bars and the drinking places were simply boards laid across two or more kegs, and their furniture was of the same rude sort. Practically the only attempt at decoration was a red curtain at every window. The red lanterns which hung before the door was more in the nature of an advertisement. Frequently, all of the various enterprises of the swamp were under one roof, and in many of the standard rates were so low that for a picayune, 6 cents, a boatman could get a drink, a woman, and a bed for the night, and the practical certainty of being robbed and perhaps murdered as soon as he fell asleep." Unquote. From the 1840s until Storyville was sectioned off in the 1890s, Gallatin Street, one of the streets fronting the river, had such a reputation for vice that it had been nearly abandoned by any other type of establishment. Now called French Market Place since 1935, Port City Vice was on display right in front of everyone on Gallatin Street. The newspaper has seemingly endless references to the debauchery that lived on Gallatin Street and the people who got in trouble because of it. One of their favorites to report on was Johanna Hawk, who was a well-known woman for decades. Born in Ireland around 1845, she starts appearing in the New Orleans arrest records and newspaper reports in the 1870s. Her public shaming continued for 20 years, and in the 1892 article about her attempted suicide, the paper goes into some detail about her life and her origins on Gallatin Street. Quote, "Johanna Hawk came to this city from Ireland about 40 years ago, a bright, pretty young girl. Her charms attracted the attention of many young men. Tommy Hawk, a dashing young fellow of rather dissipated habits, won the girl's good graces, and they were married. Soon after their marriage, the girl discovered the true character of her husband. He soon took to drinking and made the girl's life miserable. One day during the war, Hawk was arrested for robbery. However, he was cleared. After this, he was frequently arrested and soon became a noted thief. His wife was dragged down with him, and in the course of a few years had a reputation of her own. Tommy Hawk died soon after the war and left his wife to shift for herself. During the reign of the Green Tree, the famous resort of Gallatin Street, Johanna Hawk became one of its most frequent visitors. She also became a familiar figure at the Lion's Den and the Crystal Palace. Some years after Tommy Hawk's death, she met and married a man named Smithy. That made little change in her life. She was often arrested and soon became a familiar figure in the police courts. When under the influence of liquor, which was quite frequent, it would take several policemen to conduct her to the jail. Of late years, however, she has been quite well behaved and had almost dropped from public view until she tried to drop from the window of the haunted cell." Unquote. Some of these details cannot be correct. Tommy died in 1899. Emery Smithy died in 1885, according to the Louisiana Death Index. But Emery Smithy is also listed as J. Hawk's bartender at 127 Dauphine in the 1886 city directory. He is at the address as early as 1881 as a saloon keeper. He is arrested at the address several times as well. I couldn't find any marriage records for Johanna under any of the many names she claimed. Tommy was really named Thomas Hoy, according to his obituary. Johanna was Johanna Shugru, according to hers. Johanna never seems to have spelled her name like the bird, but the newspaper loved to write punny headlines like, Johanna Hawk, a soiled dove, makes 2 unsuccessful attempts to commit suicide in the 3rd precinct locked up, and trying to kidnap a brace of old hawks and their youthful prey. Most of her encounters with the police in the city directory list her address at the corner of Dauphine and Toulouse, number 127 Dauphine, within the Vice District of the second half of the 19th century. Today, this is 541 Dauphine, 904 Toulouse Street. One of the arrests was for attempting to abduct a 16-year-old girl whose name is listed as Madge Rosetta, and who had previously been in the employ of Johanna and Tommy. The police report doesn't mention it, but one of Johanna's children was named Madge Rosetta Hawk, according to this census record. Often, regulation of sex work is framed as a way to protect women. Using minor offenses, such as being in the street, authorities continuously attempt to create and enforce rules that save women from themselves while removing autonomy as neatly and thoroughly as possible, even today. As the case of Johanna Hawk demonstrates, the run-ins with the law for disturbing the peace and cursing in public are correlated to an increasingly desperate life. The fines incurred through her arrest, such as this one for $250 in 1880, is about $7,700 today. They were huge sums. While Johanna's hard knocks led her to vile acts against even her own children, her decades-long public shaming probably did not contribute to a well-lived life either. Johanna fades from the newspaper and arrest records in the 1890s. According to the Louisiana Death Index, Johanna died in 1911, so hopefully the last 2 decades of her life were somewhat peaceful. Her address in her obituary was 910 Bourbon Street, about a block away from the property Manon owned 2 centuries before. Gallatin Street was just a concentrated area that spawned many characters like Johanna, who spread out all over the city. Vice lived on every block, according to some. The Common Council of the city decided to try to regulate vice, resulting in the first segregated district in 1857. To understand the ordinance and its implications, let's examine a current bar in New Orleans that has a brothel license from the era.